Hi, everyone. It has been more than a week since the 97th Academy Awards, and you might be wondering, what can there possibly be left to say? But what I have learned over the last few years is that there's this fleeting window between when you write your hot takes about how the ceremony went and then forgetting all about it entirely. And that's the time to really sit back and ask yourself what you're taking away after watching this great spectacle unfold before all the details get really fuzzy. So last week, I gathered as many of the guests of this podcast that you've heard on this show all season as I could, and I asked them a simple question. What did you learn from this year's Oscars? The list of guests, get ready. Esther Zuckerman, Jordan Hoffman, Richard Rushfield, Tyler Coates, Michael Shulman, Sam Adams, Rebecca Ford, Shirley Li, Matt Patches, Chris Murphy, David Canfield, Sean Fennessey, Chris Feil, and Alison Brower. Let's look back one last time with that murderer's row of guests I just listed. I'm Katey Rich, and this is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. Esther Zuckerman, hello. Thank you for joining me for this post-Oscar debrief. Listeners may remember you from our episodes breaking down the Golden Globe nominations, the Oscar nominations. Do you feel like you've lived 8 lifetimes since then? Because I kind of do.
Yeah, I don't remember anything I said on those events, but
all about how we didn't think Nora had the juice and we were waiting for it to make a comeback.
And Amelia Perez was gonna win everything. And yeah, that was crazy. So yeah, I mean, everything changed.
Yeah. Well, in the time since then, Esther, what did you learn from this year's Oscars?
Obviously, Mikey winning actress was the biggest surprise of the night, I think, for everyone. My on-the-record prediction said Demi because I did think after SAG, it felt sort of undeniable. I think the thing that I learned, though, which also feels like the thing that happened last year with Lily and Emma Stone, which is that when there is a performance like what Mikey does, what Emma does, that feels sort of huge and transformative and like so important to the movie's success.
Okay.
And it's a widely liked movie, don't write it off.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
Like, obviously there was sort of the meme of like, oh, Sue came and stole the award from Demi.
Yeah.
And yes, The Substance was sort of widely liked in terms of nominations. Obviously, going into this, we knew that Anora had so many fans. And one of the things, at least I overlooked, was that, yes, if you love Anora, you're going to vote for a Mikey Madison performance because it is so crucial to the success of that movie. Mm-hmm. And I think a sort of similar thing happened with Emma Stone and Poor Things last year, which is that obviously, Poor Things didn't like run away with the Oscars in the way that Anora did, but I think we knew going into that Poor Things was way more well-liked than Killers of the Flower Moon.
Mm-hmm.
And if you liked Poor Things, you liked what Emma Stone did. Those performances carry the entire fucking movie. You can't really have those movies without those performances. And, like, voters are going to vote for them if they're in a well-liked movie. I think, like, the thing with Demi is she had the great narrative. She was an incredible campaigner. She's obviously, like, the loveliest woman alive. Like, her post to Mikey was so classy and, like, beautiful. But, like, even if you're a huge fan of The Substance, there's so much else going on other than Demi's performance. You can't really say, like, oh, Demi's performance carries the whole movie.
So do you feel like this is something you'll keep in mind for next year? Like, this is a lesson you've learned?
Yes, I think 100%. And I think it's also it is also sort of the sign of the changing Academy a little bit in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's like, look, like I very much felt like, obviously so different movies, but like Everything Everywhere, Deja Vu vibes in terms of like, also like, yeah, like if you love that movie, you're going to vote for Michelle. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, like the power of a sweep, or what people consider a sweep.
And the power of a performance that is so central to the success of a movie.
Jordan Hoffman, listeners may remember you being on the show back in October talking about New York Film Festival back when award season was young. I think Honora was there at New York Film Festival, so you were on the ground floor. Thank you for coming back to look over the season that was.
I'm happy to be here. And, it's done now. 2024 is in the books. Oscars 2025 is over. And a lot of times these movies just kind of disappear into the mists of time and our cultural memories sometimes fade. So before we go.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Before it's over, I need to say to you, Katey Rich.
Okay.
How very nice to meet you. I hope you understand sex change operations. I see. Because years from now, people aren't going to remember man or woman to man, from penis to vagina. And
they will now. Now it's burned into our brains.
An Oscar-winning movie, Zoe Saldana.
That's true. That song did not win. It won for best song, but not from that particular one, which may be a missed opportunity.
Katey, the other songs were elevated by the presence of that song. And Zoe Saldana will be in her Barca Lounge and she's going to look over and see her Oscar. And she will know, and we will know, that she won that Oscar for her performance singing How Very Nice to Meet You. I hope to understand sex change operations. Mazel tov to her.
Penis to vagina.
It's great.
Live with that.
It's great. Zoe Saldana, who has been in nothing but bad movies. I mean, I guess Guardians of the Galaxy is kind of good.
Come on my podcast and defame Avatar.
That's not a real movie. It's a bunch of
Best Picture, two Best Picture nominees.
Squirrels flopping around in the rain. It's not even a real movie, for God's sakes. It's a make-believe movie. It's not an Oscar movie. And Katey, this is what we should talk about this year on Prestige Junkie. This is what you were going to ask me. What is an Oscar movie?
Well, okay, so the question I want to ask you, that I'm asking everybody, is what did we learn from this year's Oscar race? And it sounds like what you want to say is we learned that the definition of what is an Oscar movie is maybe different from what we thought.
It's 100%. It's done. It's over. The years of a passage to India winning the Oscars as it should and out of Africa. Respectable movies about British people being boring. It's done. It's over. It's gone. What are the Oscar movies now? Everyone, Everywhere, All at Once. That is a movie. Can I say butt plug on Prestige Junkie?
They said it in an Oscar-winning movie, so sure. Actually, do they ever say butt plug? I don't know.
It's even worse. They show
it's true.
There's a magical butt plug in Everywhere, Everyone, All at Once. A movie that won 10 zillion Oscars. Best Actress. Jamie Lee Curtis even won an Oscar for that, for God's sakes.
Sure did.
And that's an Oscar picture. The one with the fish, Guillermo del Toro's fish movie, that one,
Shape of Water,
ridiculous. That one's a little bit better than Everywhere, All at Once. And now you got Honora. Now here's the thing: Honora's great. Honora's terrific. Honora deserves all of its praise. Mazel tov to Honora. And Sean Baker, what a guy. Mikey Madison, a true talent. Little new. Maybe she's, we got to see. But
every now and then they love an ingenue.
She's great, and she won. She did. Marianne Jean-Baptiste should have won, but Mikey Madison was my second choice. I'm glad Demi Moore didn't win, because that for sure ain't an Oscar movie. The Substance, give me a break.
5-time Oscar. It won Best Makeup. Oscar-winning film.
It won Best Makeup. Yeah, all right, sure. I mean,
it won a prize at Cannes. It's had the highest acclaim in the world of cinema.
You're quoting the French at me? Give me a break. What did the French know?
You quoted the French at me at the beginning singing that song.
How very nice to meet you. Listen to me, Katey. Okay. An Oscar movie today, we don't know. So what did we learn? The gloves are off. We just don't know what an Oscar movie is.
Yeah.
The years of Judi Dench cruising to another award is over.
Yeah. Now, do you think that Oppenheimer winning last year fits that trend, or is that just a weird outlook? Because that is much more of what you're talking about, Passage to India style.
Yes. I mean, because Oppenheimer is historic. It's, about, got to use your brain a little bit. But even Oppenheimer is a little bit weird. It does jump around a lot in time.
Sure.
It's
made by the Batman guy.
Made by the Batman guy. It's all set to music. I think that Oppenheimer is sort of a liminal space between the old days and this new weird frontier we're in. And there have been other nominees along the way, but we now have 3 winners that are not. But Honora is, of the 3 that I mentioned, Honora is simply brilliant. I mean, there's no two ways around it. It won and it deserved to win. That and Conclave were my 2 picks of the ones that I liked. But now it's over. So God knows. I mean, who knows how this will affect changes? And I do think that, change is probably good. I think Anora is great. And it's good to allow for weirder things. Now, I was joking when I said The Substance. I think The Substance is gross. And I think The Substance is not an Oscar movie. But I guess I do kind of see that there is some charm in letting something completely insane be nominated. I'm glad that it didn't win. I'm glad that Demi Moore lost because that is a great example of it as an honor just to be nominated.
Okay.
And she should be very happy with that nomination. She deserved to lose, and she did lose, and that's good.
No, my question for you as we take this advice, I don't think you care about predicting the Oscars the way that I do. It's not required of you, but will you keep this in mind as you look at the next season? Will you ever say again, oh, it's too weird to win Best Picture because there's no such thing anymore?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. You really don't know. What you should know is what's good. I mean, Shape of Water, EEAAO, whatever the hell that was called, and this, those movies do kind of pull at the heartstrings, right? I mean,
sure.
So The Substance is too insane, so that never would have won, and something that goes down that path, but something that is quality and connects with you emotionally, even if it's about sort of a non-traditional topic or if it's a little risque. I think it has the potential now to go all the way. We've seen it now 3 times. Shape of Water also is very touching, even though it's a little crazy.
Parasite, going back to Neon, did the same thing.
Parasite is traditional except for the fact that it's in Korean. If it was in English, it would not be.
It's got like a secret family hiding in a basement. Like it's more of a thriller than you would certainly expect from a Best Picture.
They get smushed with a giant stone, right? Don't they kill somebody in a very elaborate way? It's been a while, but
so it's been a while since I saw Parasite.
Well, but I'll tell you this. My parents are pretty indicative of the older mindset. They are boomers.
Sure.
They are boomers who love the movies, and my parents did like Anora. They loved it. In fact, my mother said it is the best of the nominees. But it came with some misgivings. It was like, oh my God, it was a porno film. We thought we were going to turn it off. I have the text that my mom was like, we almost turned it off, but then it became very funny and then it became very sad. And that is true.
That's pretty much the description of Anora.
Yeah. But it is a little bit, maybe it didn't need to be quite so blue at the beginning. Maybe he could have. Who am I to tell 4-time Oscar winner Sean Baker what to do?
Go fight with his 4 Oscars on his shelf.
I would, if I was making that movie, I would have maybe toned down some of the risque elements in the earlier part of the film. But
I suppose that's why he's Sean Baker and we're not, because he makes the choices. Richard Rushfield, my Ankler colleague and Oscar's seatmate, who you were the one who told me there was a snack box under our seat. So thank you. I would have gone hungry without your hard work. Before we close the book on this year, Richard Rushfield, what did you learn from this year's award season?
I learned that the old Academy is gone. Mm-hmm. I try to do my predictions and prognostications, which I got incredibly wrong this year. When I'm looking for who to blame for that, whose fault it is. And it's just that you're trying to balance out this idea, but the Academy likes these big pictures and these big films that send them in and show the strength of Hollywood and on a large scale. And that's all gone. We don't need to think about that anymore. It's Spirit Awards, it's the Critics' Choice, and that's it. It is dominated by sort of cineasts. How do you pronounce that?
Cineast? Sure. Yeah. It sounds like a slur when we say it, but I feel like if we said it in French, it would sound nice.
But, sort of hardcore film devotees who are not concerned with whether this speaks to a larger public or a larger pool. And, back in the days when Oscars used to go to films like Gandhi and Driving Miss Daisy, that was everything. And then there was a time where it was sort of balanced between that, where you have movies like King's Speech and Green Book that are filmic, but, not necessarily grand spectacles, but filmic, but also broad appeal. And now the balance is gone. That's what it is.
Not respecting the balance, as The Substance warned us. I think there are a lot of people who would say that like you and say it's a problem. The ratings are going to go down. We have to fix this. You seem a little more sanguine about this twist the Oscars are taking.
What's not going to happen is that a show celebrating films seen by 1 million or 2 million people that is built around 27 awards and 27 speeches, that show just isn't going to get 20 million viewers.
Sure.
And it's probably not going to get 10 million viewers soon enough either.
It seems to have gotten more than that this year. The ratings are up.
Well, we got an apples and oranges problem because it's a different kind of ratings. They went back overnight and they looked at Hulu and they found a lot more viewers, which, it's a problem we always have with the Netflix thing. Like, how do you define a viewer? Is that someone who watched a minute of the Oscars? Is that someone who, and we don't really know very much about that. You add in a new service and it went up, but you can't do that every year. So,
yeah. When we jump into award season next year and we try to deal with all this stuff, will you be keeping this in mind if you're trying to get your predictions right? Do you feel like you've learned a lesson that will stick?
I am really swallowing this now, and everybody else is not going to heed these words, and they're still going to be out there next year thinking like, this film is kind of like Gandhi, so this is the new English Patient. So I will know that it's going to be the most festival darling that is going to take the prize.
Tyler Coates, welcome back. Listeners heard you very recently on our post-Oscars episode. We've got a little bit more sleep since then, so we can assess this season one last time. So I ask you, and I've asked everybody, Tyler, what did we learn from this award season?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about Sing Sing and how it kind of underperformed based on my own expectations, but also the expectations of people I know who really loved it, who thought it had a strong shot as the sleeper hit that could capture Best Picture. But I think the lesson I learned is that you got to make sure people are able to see your movie.
You think that sounds too simple to have to say out loud.
So, yeah, A24 famously held it from VOD. It didn't really I didn't see it until, it had a very brief theatrical window, I believe in June or July.
And then came out in the summer, yeah.
Yeah, and then, they really weren't doing FYC events for it until October. I think that's when I first saw it. And, seeing the reaction in the room was insane, incredible. But then it was sort of held for a theatrical re-release. It didn't happen until I feel like late December. And meanwhile, unless you were an Academy member who had access to the streaming site, you couldn't watch it. And so I think it's a good example of you need normal people to see your movie too. You need to create buzz.
Yeah.
You need the executives, the Academy members are busy. They don't know what to see. They're not turning on a movie every single night, but their assistants might be, their colleagues might be. I think you need to make it available to more than just kind of the top level voters.
It felt like what they were counting on was something like Past Lives, which was a summer release that did really well for them. It got that Best Picture nomination. It kind of made its way through. And Sing Sing just didn't take off at the box office the way that, Past Lives is not like a runaway hit. And I guess you get it, right? Past Lives is like a love triangle. It's got this hook thing to it. And Sing Sing, it's a prison drama, but it's not super sad, but it's kind of sad. You get why it was a harder sell.
That's the thing. I kind of avoided it during its original release because I was like, oh God, I don't want to cry. I don't want to go to a movie and cry.
But
I know
it's a cathartic cry.
I know, but I just I don't want to be manipulated into crying. And the movie is not manipulative. It's very smart. It's so beautifully made, shot on film, which, was not really part of the conversation with it.
Yeah, it really wasn't.
It was just an incredible movie. And also, I think that A24 bit off a little more than it could chew this year. I think that they acquired a lot of films defensively, which meant that they just couldn't give as much love to everything. I mean, when The Brutalist is really your front runner, you have to put all of your cards in I don't know even what the metaphor is.
All eggs in a basket, I think.
There you go, yeah.
Modernist architecture blocks
Your
in
really,
one
really
building.
expensive eggs because you can barely afford them. And that was the thing. They had too many movies to support. And, reading today about how Nora's campaign cost about almost $19 million, that's a lot of money for one movie that worked. But, you kind of have to be very careful about what you spend that money on. And I think that A24 really saw The Brutalist as the one to throw their support behind. But I think if more people had seen it,
Yeah, they made a calculated choice on The Brutalist, and clearly it paid off. It won 3 Oscars. But I was at Toronto when they picked up The Brutalist, and I just kind of had that moment of being like, "Oh, this is not great for Sing Sing," which was already kind of having a hard time. I think because that summer theatrical release had been tougher. So you can't really blame them for doing exactly what they did.
But Past Lives kind of started the season last year because they had the SAG. Permission, basically, because it was an indie film, so they could go out and do campaigning. Right. So I remember interviewing Celine Song maybe in late August. So that's such a different atmosphere than what Sing Sing had. But I think you talk about a movie that all actors could really rally around. I mean, Sing Sing is about acting, the power of acting, why it's important, why it's valuable, the importance of arts at a time when arts are kind of being dismantled all around us. Yeah, I think it was a really missed opportunity, and I hope that it's one of those movies that people do find, years later, and just like, oh, this is, and maybe pundits 20 years from now who play my Oscar game where they watch an old movie and they're like, why didn't this get nominated? Why did this win? Looking at Wikipedia and seeing what the competition was, they'll understand it. But yeah, I mean, I think that's really the crux of it. People just didn't get to see it.
It might be wishful thinking to hope that Greg Wheater and Clint Bentley get the Sean Baker trajectory at some point where they're, people think Sean Baker's made 4 movies, he's made 8. Like you're going to go back and eventually see the stuff they earlier made, and Sing Sing is more widely seen than Starlet, Sean Baker's early movie ever was. But you're totally right that these things can have long lives, and Sing Sing now is on VOD. People can see it, so the potential for discovery is still there.
Yeah.
How do you think you will take that lesson with you in your own work for the next award season? That's a lesson for distributors mostly, but what will you be keeping in mind of what we learned from Sing Sing?
That is a really good question. I mean, I think, look, I've argued this before on this podcast. We are in a very specific bubble. We are seeing every single movie, and we know the ins and outs of it. We know all the narratives. We know who the craftspeople are, and we have a greater knowledge than the average Academy member. The average Academy member, again, who is a working professional, presumably.
They don't have a ton of time to see movies. They got to make them.
No, exactly. And if you're one of the people who's in this madness of an award season, you really have no time to see anything else unless you're kind of like given the assignment to, because you're doing a variety actors on actors or a round table, and you have to know how to talk to the actor. So yeah, I think that is something that I'm always trying to remember and kind of like tone down my own expectations, because my awareness of this space is very different than the people who actually vote for the awards.
Michael Shulman, welcome back. Listeners last heard you. We were talking back at the end of October last year, trying to predict what the battle lines of this year's Oscar season would be. I don't think either of us saw a tweet scandal coming, though. So there's a limit to how much we can predict the future.
However, I remember that day I recorded directly after seeing Conclave in a screening.
That's right.
And I believe I said, Conclave reminds me a lot of the Academy Awards. And that did turn out to be true. And I later wrote a New Yorker piece about how, once the scandals hit, this cascade of scandals, it did feel a lot like Conclave, because every movie had some skeleton in its closet or some mini scandal.
It was incredible.
And that became a metaphor that other people I saw using, that it felt like Conclave.
So when all is said and done, Michael, what did you learn from this year's Oscar race?
That the Oscars are truly international now. And I know we talk about that a lot. Oh, the Academy has a lot more international members. But I really felt it just being at the ceremony, especially, walking in on the red carpet. I saw kilts, keffiyehs, kimonos. At one point at the governor's ball, I was near the engraving stand where people, have their Oscars engraved. And I found myself in between a conversation in Portuguese and Russian, because I was between the I'm Still Here people and the Anora people.
Wow.
This season felt like the World Cup, and like Brazil and France were in the semifinals or something. And I just think that has so many implications for the campaigns, what gets nominated, what the Academy is, what the show is. It struck me as ironic in a way that this show began with songs from The Wizard of Oz and The Wiz about how LA is home. You know, there's songs about home. It's the whole show started with Dorothy saying there's no place like home, and then we see the glittering landscape. But I don't think that Hollywood is the center of gravity for the Oscars necessarily anymore. Maybe that's just this year more than other years. Certainly last year was more Hollywood-centric with Barbenheimer and everything, but it felt palpably different than just even going to the ceremony 7 or 8 years ago. Also, I think there's more room for culture clash in a way, and I think in some sense you could read the Emilia Perez sort of implosion as global culture clash. You know, someone says something in a Brazilian newspaper that then ricochets around the world and, you know, insults some other country or, you know, I think there's more room for that. And nothing that anyone says to like a local newspaper in any of these countries is going to stay in that country.
That's true.
And countries are different.
And a joke that feels okay in France is not necessarily going to feel okay in the U.S., which I think is what we really learned from Emilia Perez.
Or a joke that you made in Spanish in Spain 4 years ago is going to be completely horrifying.
But put it on Twitter, which is maybe where everything went awry. So going forward into next year, you know, I don't think that you like obsessively try to predict all the Oscar categories correctly the way some of us do, but how will you keep this in mind? How's that going to change your approach to writing about the season?
I mean, another thing I remember talking about with you many months ago is, you know, who's going to bring the sort of old school Hollywood glamour to award season this year? And I remember predicting it would be, you know, maybe Denzel Washington or maybe Angelina Jolie. Of course, it ended up being neither of those. I guess it was Demi Moore in a way who did that. But for a movie directed by a French director that sort of takes this outside in sort of warped view of Hollywood.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like this ceremony brought that Hollywood glamour through the presenters, people like Daryl Hannah, but even a big Hollywood movie like Gladiator 2 was represented by a Danish actress, Connie Nielsen, up there for their costume nomination. So in terms of predicting, I just think it's a very different animal. And I think back to 1949 when Olivier's Hamlet won, and it was such a scandal because it was a foreign film, you know, from England and not made by the Hollywood studio system. So how far we've come from that.
Yeah. Sam Adams, welcome back. Listeners last heard you in early February wrapping up Sundance, maybe talking about some of next year's Oscar winners. We have a little bit of time left before we need to think about that. Sam Adams, what did you learn from this year's Oscar season?
Well, I think one thing we learned this year is that this is a long race and you really can't count anybody out in, you know, November or December just because it seems like they don't really have any momentum. I think both Conclave and especially Anora kind of seemed dead in the water at the end of last year. And, you know, I felt like the rap on Anora really was, and I probably said this myself at least, hopefully privately and not in print. But the rap on Anora seemed to be like, look, this movie is just like kind of too much fun to win an Oscar. Like it's sort of, there are some emotional layers in there, but it's riffing on rom-coms and slapstick comedy, farce mixed in among the tones. And it just seemed like maybe people were thinking this wasn't substantial enough to win Best Picture. And in fact, it was not only substantial enough to win that, but to come away with 5 Oscars. Yeah. So, you know, it might have been the year. Often, you know, people feel like, oh, these are dark times and we need to, you know, really strong political work that speaks to the times. And it feels like, I wouldn't say that Anora is apolitical, but it is not a movie that's like making an obvious statement in that way. And it seemed like voters are kind of really in the mood to just be like, you know, one thing movies can really do is just make you feel a little bit better about living in the world.
Yeah. If I can squeeze in a bonus take from you, since you were writing about No Other Land on Oscar night and you know more about the documentary world than I do, I think a lot of people were kind of skeptical that a movie that's that challenging to some prevailing political wisdom, if there's a way to put that, might struggle with the larger Academy win. Have you learned anything largely from what it means that No Other Land did win that Best Documentary prize?
I mean, I think the documentary category in particular is a place where Oscar voters feel comfortable making a political statement. Statements that in common sense terms really don't feel like this should necessarily be that controversial, like saying
they need to be said out loud.
Yeah, you shouldn't be bulldozing people's homes, or that Alexei Navalny is like a brave person. Sure. Those don't seem like super edgy political statements, except in their current context. Sure. I think it's there are probably ways and ways of looking at that. I mean, it may be the easiest movie to vote for without watching all 5 documentaries. That might be one way to look at it. But I think Noah in the Land is an incredibly strong film. I think it had no distributors, most people know, but as I'm sure you, Katey, know, and probably some of our listeners, it had an incredibly powerful and successful publicity firm, Cinetic, behind the campaign. So they were not, just kind of going in with 2 popsicle sticks and some glue. Like they had a real campaign, and they very smartly turned their inability to get at least a sort of solid, the kind of distribution offer that they wanted. They really turned that into a plus for them and made this, I had so many people lighting up my social feeds on Monday just being like, where can I see this movie?
And it's playing in a lot of theaters. That's the thing that I think is easy to overlook too, with the talk about not having a distributor.
Yeah, I mean, it's in 100 theaters. It became, this is extremely low bar to clear, but it became the highest grossing Oscar-nominated documentary this year. I mean, that only meant that it made $400,000 in theaters in the U.S. because the Oscars, the documentary branch in particular, is kind of allergic to a big grossing movie like the Christopher Reeve documentary or certainly the sort of right-wing stuff like Am I Racist, which made $12 million last year. But they were very much able to make do with that. They had turned their smallness into a plus. That also happened with Flow in the animated category, where I think were able to turn their smallness, the fact that this was a movie made on free open source software in a year, which is an insane timeline for mainstream Hollywood animation, and really turn that into a plus. I think that's also, I wouldn't underestimate the power of just sheer face-to-face campaigning and charisma as far as these campaigns. I mean, one thing you can say about Sean Baker and about the director of Flow is that, these guys are really good in a room. They both won awards at the New York Film Critics Circle and came to the ceremony, and it's just like they light up a room. They are so obviously passionate, not about what they do, but about their whole medium and the art form as a whole. And I think that's really contagious.
Rebecca Ford, listeners, last heard you a while ago. I last saw you exiting the governor's ball. I had a chocolate Oscar stuffed under my arm. So it's good to see you again now that we're back out of our formal wear. Do you feel like you've recovered? Have your feet recovered from the long night of the Oscars?
Yes, I finally feel like I've recovered. I think it took till Wednesday to really get my bearings back. But it was so fun to do the Oscars with you, Katey.
Oh,
We'd
my
never
God.
done that before.
What a good time. The chicken pot pies at the governor's ball. I never would have known that it was the priority. Well, maybe that's the number one thing I learned from this Oscar season is that the chicken pot pies are a necessary stop. But what did you learn from this year's Oscar season?
What I've been thinking about is sort of the performances that I thought deserved to make it and didn't. So Saoirse Ronan from The Outrun, Daniel Deadwater, as our listeners know, I talk about The Piano Lesson all the time, and of course Marianne Jean-Baptiste, which we are both big fans of. And I think there is something happening where if you're like sort of the sole representation for your film, it's harder than it used to be to get in there for an acting performance. It used to be actresses were often the only representation of their movie, and it worked that way pretty well. But, from this year, we saw that all the actresses were from films that were nominated elsewhere. And so something is shifting there. I don't think it's just this year.
Yeah.
And I worry about those little movies with a big performance finding their way to enough voters. I think it's something about what films the voters are choosing to see, and if they know it's a contender elsewhere, that's a priority, I think.
What do you think is making that change? Because when you think about To Leslie is like the ultimate example of a small film with a big heart that made it through as a lone nominee. And like, that's the power of like a pretty small group of well-connected actresses in LA. Like, are they less powerful because the Academy is more international? Like, what's making this shift?
Yeah, it's still, we're still talking about the acting branch doing these nominations. And I guess not every single person can get a bunch of very powerful actresses to back their campaign like that. Because that did show us that it is a small group you have to actually reach to get that nomination.
Yeah.
But I do think they're, of course, harder to reach because they are more spread across the world. Like, it's not just about viewing parties in LA even if those are allowed or not allowed. I can't remember what changed in the
whatever
rules.
current version they can do.
But yeah, I mean, just because you could get all the, your actor friends in LA, it may not be enough like it used to be. It really feels like you have to have a movement for the film, which in some cases is great. Like, I don't want it to all go back to just lone actress nominees where they don't have anything else. But I think having some variation, in the nominees and the winners would be nice.
Yeah. Okay, you said you came with several. Is there another big takeaway you want to throw out there?
Yeah, this is sort of a cheesy one, but, I was at the governor's ball with you, and we ran into Janet Yang, and, she was pointing out it's her last year. She has to step away and take a break based on the rules as president. And it made me really realize, like, how good the Oscars have been since she and Bill Kramer came on board. Like, there's been no real scandals. They didn't try to, like, move some of the categories to the commercial breaks or like bring in a popular Oscar category and then change their mind.
Did she start after the slap or before the slap?
After the slap. So she and Bill started at the same time. And I think it was really like a reset. And I think that there hasn't been an issue since. And I mean, they make it look easy. And if we don't have to think back very far to when there was like drama every year about the decisions that were being made. So, Bill Kramer will still stay on. He's in 2028. So, I think he's doing a really good job running the ship too. But I think it's been nice to have a few years where things just feel like classy and nice and normal.
Yeah.
So I was thinking a lot about that.
I don't know how much credit to give her for like Conan O'Brien doing such a great job as host. But when I was talking to her with you at the governor's ball, I just kind of made the suggestion like, hey, invite him back. And obviously she wouldn't confirm that. But like, it did seem that she agreed. Like, he is the right tone to strike. So whatever she did to make that happen, I feel like she deserves a lot of credit.
Yeah, I think they've been a great pair. And I'm sure the next president will be great. But it has been a nice, smooth few years.
It's so nice to hear someone say, I'm sure the next president will be great in a context that doesn't involve the national government.
It's going to be a great pull quote. The last thing I've been thinking a lot about is Oscar predictions and people who are paid to do this job. You and
like
I
us?
both. Yes, like us. I think, we do a mix. I think we cover the industry. There are certain outlets that have to do predictions almost all year long, every week. And I would love everyone to look at a little bit more of a critical eye about what films are getting early elevation through that system. Like, the studios really value being at the tops of those lists, even when it's like September, and
or like now, like we're all about to make our own predictions for next year. They will be meaningless.
And I think the people who do it, have to consider they have a responsibility maybe to elevate little films that aren't going to have the studio behind them. Like, I think a lot about that. And also to realize you have your own biases. Like, there are certain prognosticators, I think, that pick films that are their favorite. But for me, and I think we think about what the Academy will vote for. So I don't know. I was doing some investigating on who got the most right predictions and stuff. And I think everyone needs to look with a critical eye with that stuff, but we'll see.
And except you might go over 3 on the shorts, as we both did. And
yeah, we both did. The shorts don't count. The shorts don't count.
Shirley Li, thank you for coming back. We've survived the season. As we were just saying, our brains are a little bit empty of other information. We'll learn other things at some point. But before you forget the Oscars entirely, what did you learn from this year's award season?
Okay, I took some notes. Conan is a fantastic host. I mean, I don't
You were the first person to come ready to talk about Conan, and I feel like he really deserves more credit. Yeah.
Oh, man, I thought I was going to be late to this. I think he deserves more credit. I'm not saying that we learned Conan's great. I think we knew Conan's great. But he came prepared in a way that was like, that just works for the show. He read the room. He juggled the tones really well. I like that he kind of cringed at himself after the Miley Cyrus and Miles Teller joke.
Kilometer and
kilometry. It's so stupid. I think I giggled, I chuckled, and then as soon as I saw his face kind of fall while he's saying it, it just made it 1,000 times funnier. So the guy's good at this. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think going from there, I think Neon is on a roll is what we've learned. You know, I mean, it's been a couple years since Parasite also swept, and it's kind of like, oh, you know, this outfit's really making a move in awards season, and I think they kind of upended whatever Netflix was hoping to do throughout the season. Which
Netflix also, there were some own goals there as well.
Yeah. Several own goals that just could not be saved. And that brings me to another takeaway, which is that I think the controversies and the headlines and the fact that Conclave existed as a really great comparison for everything that was happening in the
metaphor,
race.
yeah.
Yes, made the race seem tighter than it really was.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I think if you look at the wins over the course of the season, Honora may have missed out on some things, and I wouldn't say that Honora was like a sure thing all the way in.
Yeah.
But as we got closer and closer to the Oscars itself, it was as safe a bet as you could make.
Yeah.
I still think if we look back and we think about it a little harder, and we don't have to because our brains are like fried at this point, Honora was set up to take everything, really.
Yeah.
I mean, the big awards, it just seemed like there was more competition because of the own goals.
Yes.
Because Conclave existed and we could all just keep calling everything Conclave-esque.
Which we might continue to do next year. Why not? Why leave
we
Conclave
might as
behind?
well. I think we should. I think everything should be Conclave. Love Conclave. And then just two more quick things. I think maybe awards PR people need to start looking at tweets.
I think that is
one
a
takeaway
firm
for
lesson
them.
learned by the people whose job it is to do that.
Very much so. And then the last very silly thing I've noticed is that a Best Actress winner has not worn gold or silver for many years now, since 2018, which doesn't feel, that long ago.
Is that
but
Frances
that is 7 years
McDormand
ago,
was the
Katie.
last one? She had that kind of like brownish gold dress.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, it's been a while. And I think
Glenn Close famously did wear gold and didn't win. Maybe that was the curse.
That's what I'm saying. It's just conventional wisdom and I'm borrowing this from like Tom and Lorenzo, the fashion bloggers. Like they always say, if you want to win an Oscar, you must be an Oscar. You must you must dress as the Oscar. So you're gold or you're metallic or you're silver. And we've had some white gowns, but no silver. Yeah. And Demi wore a silver gown. That's all I'm saying.
How do you feel about Mikey's dress? Do you feel like, if you're looking at the pantheon of Best Actress dresses, where's it going to go?
It's I like that it's retro. I like that it's vintage. I like that it kind of broke away from what she's been wearing all season. This is so frivolous, but also important.
No,
you know what? It's important.
The Oscars are about frivolity and about meaning, and they go hand in hand, and that is why we love them.
Yeah, I mean, like, here's the thing, right? She's been wearing strapless outfits, dresses, like, all season. She stuck to, like, a palette of black and white and red. And so the pink was a little unexpected.
Yeah.
But I can't say that it was my favorite look of the night. It didn't look like what you would expect a winner to wear. That's all I'm saying.
It is a little more first nomination. Like Monica Barbaro's dress was like kind of like big and pink, and you could like see her in the front row, and that has a kind of like, I'm glad to be here, I don't think I'm gonna win thing to it. So like maybe Mikey really didn't think she was gonna win, and that's the secret lesson.
That's what I'm going with. And I'll also say that Timothée Chalamet showing up in butter yellow is not Oscar gold.
I was just going to ask,
doomed.
do you feel like that was him dressing to try to manifest an Oscar and he just missed the mark, or is it something totally different?
I think he was trying to put his own little spin on it, which is his prerogative, and I love that he does that constantly. But I was like, that's not Oscar gold.
Matt Patches, welcome back. People last heard you here talking about how the video game awards are far superior to the Oscars. I think that was your take, right? Like burn the Oscars down, replace them with the game awards.
I'm not that hardcore. I think there's things to learn from the Game Awards. I'm interested in them as a curio that's growing into a mainstream event, but I think there's things to learn in both directions.
We will keep talking about them, but I do want to know if any of that influences your choice for what you learned from this year's award season.
Yeah, I think our conversation about the Game Awards and covering that more directly and trying to involve myself with that was a lens on how I watched the Oscars telecast this year, which I thought was very fun. I love Conan. I love speeches. I love tributes. I want to say that all up front. And I think my takeaway was that I'm not sure we, the movie lovers or the Academy, are making a very good case for the movies.
Okay.
And it starts with, can the Oscars be a must-watch event again? I think it's something we dwell on every year, and people come up with kind of the wrong reasons and wrong ways to approach it. And I think that the Oscar ceremony, and maybe this has to do with just like this conservative wave that we're experiencing in all of life right now, but I couldn't help but think that the amount of time that's devoted to looking back and hoping that people will renew their interest in movies and appreciating the legacy of movies is somehow antithetical to connecting with people who are younger, who we want to care about movies on the level that watching the Oscars every year and giving a shit about them would entail. There's a few different things that struck me. I mean, the Bond performances, trying to get younger singers, Lisa and Doja Cat. I just think this is the wrong. Like
we can call that a flop. I don't think that was a successful effort there.
I mean, I immediately went from those performances and checked their Instagram accounts to be like, were they promoting this? Like I couldn't even find traces of I'm going to the Oscars, everyone. I'm Doja Cat going to the Oscars. I'm Lisa. I'm like,
that's a good point.
How are these people bringing eyeballs to the screen? Is it cool that Doja Cat is at the Oscars? Do people care and connect with her on that level? I'm not sure they do. And I'm not sure them singing Bond songs makes any sense to anyone. Okay. And then I was also struck by Sean Baker, who he's been appropriately lauded. First off, I love Anora, and I'm glad he won. I'm glad he won a bunch of awards. That's cool. And he really strategically used his speeches to evangelize film and like the theatrical experience. He's gone around a lot and said like, I make movies for movie theaters and these big screens, and I want people to go and have this communal experience. And it just feels, is this still like preaching to a choir and not really connecting with people, the tastes of young people, and like wanting to go to the movies? Is just saying we need to put movies in theaters. It just reminds me of when people were like screaming online about, if you really want to see a Christopher Nolan movie the right way, you got to go 50 miles to your nearest 70 millimeter IMAX and get your ass there and care.
They're going to do that again for the Odyssey. Buckle up. That's not going away.
Well, I'll get my.
So you feel like there's this preachiness as opposed to like ginning up enthusiasm for the movies that actually are coming.
Yeah, and I'm projecting.
Is this really about trailers? Is what you mean trailers, or is it more than that?
Well, I think there's something to that too, and that's where the Game Awards strategy comes in, which is like a lot of people will watch the Game Awards not for the awards themselves because they're not invested. Who cares who wins these awards? And it's a fair question to ask about the Oscars themselves. What the Game Awards has figured out is, well, we need to show lots of trailers for new stuff, things that might not come out for like 4 years. Like imagine if our first look at Avatar, Fire and Ash had been 2 years ago at the Oscars,
which could very well be a Best Picture nominee. It's not even like it's off topic for the Oscars themselves for you to show an Avatar preview.
Like everyone would cringe their teeth out if Robert Downey Jr. had come out on stage to give Best Supporting Actor while he was in his Doomsday costume for the first time. But also, wouldn't it matter? Like, wouldn't people be like, they've promised to show this, I will watch. I will experience everything else around it in anticipation of this moment. And maybe it didn't need to be that clunky, but like you can imagine that sell. There's another layer to this, though, where it doesn't have to be about like superhero movies and popcorn film, but like, what is Letterboxd energy? That's something I've been thinking about after the show. Like, what brings this like youth contingent to Letterboxd, engaging with these takes? It seems to be a vibrant platform. I can't tell you how many people actually use it. I haven't done the math before coming on the show, but I wonder if like I'm trying to think of what sizzle reels we saw. We got a Wiz appreciation during the show. Fine, okay, but like where's the sizzle reel of horror movies that teases like where's the Oz Perkins appreciation reel that congratulates Longlegs and then has like a clip of a new horror movie that's coming this year? Like, couldn't we be packaging some of these sizzle reels to link past and future and say like, do you love Gladiator and Ben-Hur? Here is 5 seconds of the Odyssey straight from the set of Christopher Nolan's movie. Why don't we get that?
So you're talking like the showmanship of like CinemaCon and Comic-Con and bringing it on stage at the Oscars for a massive audience.
Yeah, and then connecting it to the past to say like, oh, I guess I should watch those other movies that look cool. I've been anticipating the new, but I need to see the old. And that's where the Letterboxd stuff comes in. It's like the cult of Nolan or the cult of Osgood Perkins or the cult of whoever.
Robert Eggers, Nosferatu's nominated for 4 Oscars.
Right. And there's just like no pageantry for that. And as much as I love Conan, I could have watched a whole 2 hours of Conan doing movie bits, but I don't think Conan is getting younger people to care about the movies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Just the whole show felt like swimming upstream.
Well, it
we are
always
going
does.
to beg people that movies matter instead of like showing, not telling. Isn't this the classic lesson?
Operating from a
Screenwriting.
place of confidence as opposed to please come see our movie still.
Right. Like, what else is coming? What will be in the Oscar mix next year that I would want to get a
Avatar,
taste
Fire and
of? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's all I want.
David Canfield, last seen with me at the valet line at the Governor's Ball, as with Rebecca Ford, who everyone's heard earlier. How's your Oscar recovery going? You feel back to normal?
I'm back to normal. I'm only watching television. Movies do not exist. You know, the transition we all know and love.
This is why we're doing this episode, is to linger just a little bit longer on the Oscar season that I think we're all a little sad to leave behind. So, David Canfield, what did you learn from this year's award season?
I learned, or I suppose I relearned, that the Academy watches the movies. And that is something that I am taking a bit of a cue from Neon CEO Tom Quinn, who's been going around saying that very proudly. However, I often get stuck in the space between narrative and, I don't want to say merit because it's a lot of deserving stuff that gets nominated every year, but narrative versus the undeniable winner, perhaps. And this is the second year in a row, particularly in Best Actress, where I got a little bit more swayed by story than by what would happen if you put a bunch of voters in front of a list of 5 performances and they voted for their favorite. And I think this was another year where we saw the winner, in this case, Mikey Madison, last year's case, Emma Stone, emerge out of that. Even as the stories behind their main rivals were quite powerful.
Is this something that explains other wins that you can think of like a movie that didn't have as much of the narrative, but was something that people just like obviously saw and loved?
So this actually did have a narrative, but I also think it applies No Other Land. This was a film that did not have distribution, that was destined to be a bit more controversial, divisive within the Academy. One can just remember Jonathan Glazer's speech from a year ago for Zone of
I think
Interest.
that's why some people thought it wouldn't win. They thought the broader Academy would not want to go back down that road.
And even with guilds that it was nominated at, it did not win. And I think a big reason why is it just wasn't seen widely enough. It was, for whatever reason, there were many barriers for that film. But it was an extraordinary documentary. And I think that one thing you see is, particularly with newer members, there is an investment in seeing everything. And you don't quite get that with the guilds. And so when you get to the Academy and you have that level of investment, it really helps a film like No Other Land, even if it doesn't have a distributor with any kind of manpower. It certainly had, agencies like Cinetic working really hard for it, but that can make a big difference. Just having an engaged membership gives anyone a fighting chance once you're nominated.
I wonder about that with Flow as well. Like, I think The Wild Robot was a really wonderful movie, but Flow, like, really captivated people who saw it. And, like, if you saw a still from it, you wouldn't really get its power as much as if you actually saw the movie.
And it's sort of, it's hard to explain, I think, with animated, but I think a lot of people in the Academy did not see The Wild Robot as an FYC movie. You know, this is the age-old story with animated contenders, is they are often kids' movies, and Academy members there are a lot of parents in there, and they see them for various reasons. Flow was not a movie that anyone in the Academy was seeing except for the purposes of awards consideration. And I think that you have a different switch in your brain when you go into an animated film like that, even as I think The Wild Robot is a beautiful, wonderful movie, and I'm so glad it got nominations beyond that category, but it can be very difficult for that film. It can be very difficult for a film like that to be thought of as, as artistic as Flow, even if it is, just given its backing and everything.
Yeah, there's 3 Wild Robot books, and they're also really good. And I don't imagine an animated sequel is going to get more consideration, but like, I bet the second one's going to be really good, assuming that they make it. So maybe we'll be back here. Last question then. So how do you take this lesson with you to next season? Are you just going to really try to focus on quality over narrative more than you used to?
I think so. I think that, first of all, a great speech at the Golden Globes or the Critics' Choice Awards can certainly help with a nomination. Really does not matter for a win, no matter what we tell ourselves. nor do the actual results of those awards. But again, I do think that they help with nominations a lot. Narrative is hugely important for getting into the race, having, a campaign to run. That's where it ends, I think, to an extent, is getting that nomination. But I'm already thinking of some people like Julia Roberts who have exciting potential narratives to run. And I just need to keep myself in check depending on how it all shakes out, because who knows, maybe another Brazilian film will come, storming through.
We should be so lucky. The enthusiasm of the Brazilian fans really lit a fire under a lot of us this season. I think we
Richard
want them
Lawson
back.
has brought my attention to a Brazilian film likely premiering at Cannes that I'm not going to be taking for granted. That's for sure.
Time to learn some Portuguese, honestly. I need to be able to understand what people are sending to me on Blue Sky, because there's a lot of Portuguese out there.
Truly.
Chris Murphy, listeners, last heard you last fall. We were gearing up for Wicked, which did feel like it took over your life for a while and then took over the world. So you were kind of on the vanguard.
Big flop, that Wicked, right?
What a
sort
shame.
Of faded into the
Oscars don't nominate movies that anybody ever sees, as we
so
all
sad.
know. So we survived all of that. Wicked Part 2 coming around the corner, so
Cannot
we'll be
wait.
back. But in the meantime, as we wrap up this year's Oscars, what did you learn from this award season?
Okay, what I learned is, and this might be controversial, but if you see Emma Stone at the Oscars, expect chaos. She is a harbinger of Oscar surprise, Oscar doom for some people. Wherever there is an Oscar surprise, Emma Stone is literally right there.
Is
Go
she
back
the
to La La Land.
reason Demi Moore lost? Is that the theory you're throwing out
I
here?
honestly believe if a different presenter had come out, and the envelope would have said to me, it would have said to me, she was, La La Land, Moonlight. She won the Oscar that year, and that's the big kerfuffle happened. Then when Glenn Close lost the Oscar, who was sitting right next to Olivia Colman?
She sure
Emma
was.
Stone. Emma
Looking
Stone.
as happy as a human being has ever looked. That's always been my, have someone look at you the way that Emma Stone looks at Olivia Colman giving her Oscar speech.
100%. And then, never forget, last year, everybody thought it was Lily Gladstone. And then who wins the Oscar?
There she is.
Once again, Emma Stone. So, and usually, and another thing too with this year, usually they have the best actor from the last year presents to the best actress and the best, and they swap the genders.
Yep.
And this year they kept it right down the middle. And what happens? Emma Stone comes out and she says Mikey Madison.
Do you not wonder if that's because they didn't want Adrian Brody to kiss Emma Stone? They were worried about him not restraining himself again.
Adrian Brody drums on Mikey Madison. Yeah, I actually, I think that was definitely a safety precaution. I think that was quite smart. But that's when I saw her walk out, I was like, okay, this might not be going. And again, it was close. Yeah. And the Honora sweep, some saw it coming, but there's a lot of chatter that was like, oh, Mikey had it in the bag. She didn't have it in the bag. Demi had the...
Do people really think that?
Online, in my mentions, online they do. People are screaming at me as if I don't know what the Oscars are. And I was like, where have you been? Demi won the SAG. She had the narrative. She had the surge of momentum, but Emma Stone was holding that envelope.
Yeah, it's like the contents of the envelopes can change once Emma Stone is in the building. You never know.
If she's around and you think you're going to win or you're supposed to win, you can just crumple that speech. You can just throw it away.
Congratulations, Kieran Culkin, for surviving.
Oh, God.
Made it through as expected.
If she had presented that, Jeremy would have won.
Was she also produced a real pain? Emma Stone's going to continue being at the Oscars for a really long time, given how successful she has been and how the movie she's working on. So buckle up, I guess.
And thank God, because I love a surprise. Who doesn't we need a surprise? It's so great. It was so fantastic. So I hope she never leaves. I hope every
Stay
single
in
time
that building.
Stay in that building, stay producing, stay acting. If you want to compose a little.
Her new Yorgos movie is coming out this year, so...
Simply cannot wait. Oh, gosh. Yeah, but
did you say you had another one, too?
Oh, well, my other one was that, if you can't tell, I love Best Actress. You can't dress to win. You can't.
Okay, you were the second person to bring this up, that, people used to dress to win. I think the question of whether Timothée Chalamet was dressed to win with his, yellow adjacent thing. So you feel like Demi dressed to win and did the Glenn Close and kind of...
I think she did the Glenn Close. And, of course, there are plenty of people who dressed to win and won. But it just seems like recently you can't... If you go sparkle, you go gold... If you honestly, who dressed to win was Emma Stone when she won for La La Land. She was in a gold sparkly dress.
She absolutely was. She had gold on this year's Oscars too. It was kind of it was a clear, like, I'm not nominated. Like, I can be a little bit, you had like that low V-neck thing.
Low V-neck, yeah. But I do think, when I saw Demi on the carpet, I was like, I got nervous just because it was so sparkly. It was so like, this is my moment. And then it was snatched away by a very good performance. To bring it back to
Wicked, because I do trust you as the renowned expert, like Cynthia and Ariana front wrote the Oscars. Did that all turn out how you hoped it would when this all began? Did it go as well as it could have?
It actually exceeded my wildest dreams. From the beginning, I saw it, I was like, okay, this movie has the juice. It could really go far. It went really far. They both got nominated. I was worried about that. I think I said that on this podcast. I was worried about that. They both got nominated, which was amazing. And then they kind of actually, even though they didn't win, which there's part 2 coming, who's to say? They're still in it. Could be in it for next year. They stole the Oscars because they did the best performance ever. It was unbelievable.
It was so good.
It sounded amazing. Yeah. They kicked it off. It was incredible. I think that's kind of the win there. Like, that's such an amazing end to the arc. So I gotta say,
and into the first part of the arc, to the arc part 1.
Well, the arc as it circles around Ouroboros, like just
we'll just be in Wicked forever and ever. We never get out.
Ever and ever. It'll never. For good.
For good. Sean Fennessey, welcome back. We talked at the very beginning of this season. Like, you and I kind of kicked things off together, and now here we are at the end of this road. We've recovered from the awards themselves. What did you learn from this award season, Sean?
So much. Thanks for having me back, Katey. I think I was sharing with you at the very beginning of the season, don't give up on challengers, and it turns out I was wrong on that. We should have given up on challengers.
Wouldn't you rather have the moral victory of not having give up? I never gave up, even though I knew it was unlikely, and I feel proud that I hung on to it for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it lives in my heart forever, obviously, but not in Oscar's heart, unfortunately. No. I have learned, I don't know if I officially learned a new lesson, but I think a lesson has been confirmed for me with this season, which is that Oscar bait is dead as we know it, and there is a new version of Oscar bait. I don't know what to call it yet, but it is about class. If you look at the last 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of Best Picture winners, with a handful of exceptions, all of these stories are about class.
Wow. I don't think I've ever heard anybody put it that way. This is fascinating to learn something new in this point of the process of making this episode.
Well, and I'm not sure if that's even a conscious choice that Academy voters are making. It might be a testimony to how the world works these days. It might be what kinds of stories are exciting. Obviously, there's been a tremendous number of independent films that have been winning Best Picture in the last 10 years. But if you look at Nomadland, if you look at Parasite, if you look at Moonlight, if you look at, of course, Nora this year, even Coda in many ways is a working class film. The exception that proves this rule is Oppenheimer, but I would argue that even Oppenheimer does not have the makings of a classic Best Picture winner once you set aside the great man conceit of that movie.
Oppenheimer also has the son of a shoe salesman thing about Robert Downey Jr.'s character. It's there in the margins, I think.
Yeah. And this isn't going to apply to every single film that wins Best Picture, but even Green Book, unloved Best Picture winner that it is very much, the Vala Longa story is very much a story about a middle-class family.
Totally.
And I think that that's notable. And as I look down the long list, the 50-plus film list of 2026 contenders, I'm now looking at it with an eye towards what is a story that is not just about a great moment in history or a huge battle. It's not necessarily a war story. It's not necessarily a story about someone who invented something. It's a story about people who are trying to survive in a complicated economic state, usually. And this is something that's been interesting to me about Nora having this remarkable run for the last 6 months since we first started talking, is that is obviously a major theme of this movie, but I don't know that theme was surfaced as much during the campaign. I know you've been joking about following your heart and the way that they, Neon very smartly ran their campaign, but they made it seem like a love story or like a story of a heartful young woman. And it is that, but it's also a story about a woman getting tricked into thinking she could cut the line to the top of the American fantasy. And so I am thinking about this more and more when I think about what we do week to week when we look at these races. What do you think?
Well, it's kind of like an elemental Hollywood story, right? Like you've got this town built by people who were kind of came from working class backgrounds. Like a lot of the Jewish founders of Hollywood were trying to like, build up their name and find respect. And there's like the discovering Lana Turner at Schwab story. Like you pluck someone out of obscurity and you build them into something. So it's like, even though I think it's a lot of the independent films you're talking about, like it might just be more of like an effect of the indies taking over the Oscars. It does feel like it's this like root story of Hollywood that draws them back. Even if I wonder if you asked an Academy member if they would be conscious of that as a trend that they've been building for themselves.
I think probably not. I think there's also something, from talking to people who live in Hollywood and work in Hollywood, especially very successful people, is they have a lot of anxiety about being seen as too successful or being seen as not in touch with their roots or not in touch with where they came from. And this is a way to kind of honor that, or at least to indicate that you haven't completely lost sight of your experiences. It's not true for everybody. The other thing too is that sometimes incredibly wealthy people sometimes feel like they're doing an act of charity by acknowledging a story that does this. Yeah. And so that's something that still exists in this town. And I don't know how much the international expansion of the body reflects that too, that whether or not that's a meaningful factor is maybe worth examining.
I think Tom Quinn was out there giving an interview though saying something like the international contingent is 20% of the Academy or something, like a smaller number than you would think based on how much we've talked about how important they've been. So it's like more, I think he described them as a swing vote. So if if this isn't something that resonates with like the Hollywood block of the Academy, it's not going to go anywhere. But if it gets them plus the international voters who respect a Palme d'Or winner, that might be the magic formula.
Do you think that the international voters watch more of the nominated films when they vote?
Well, so this is something just before we recorded this, David Canfield was on. I think people will be hearing them in the same order. And he said the lesson he learned is that they watch the movies. And that's why Mikey Madison wins, because they see the performance as transformative. It's the Emma Stone Poor Things thing as well. So I like the faith that they are actually watching the movies. I'm sure there are people who don't. I wonder every year about the shorts and who's actually watching them. But I do think that like if you have something that's going to sway people, if it's there in the movie itself, it's going to have its power.
I have one other takeaway for you, and it's a very small one, but one I know you'll appreciate, which is, let's set aside the conversation about whether or not the short should be a part of the show or on the telecast. We as prognosticators and pundits should not be forced to pick the shorts for our gambling odds. Yeah, we can't do anything. I don't know anybody who got all three right.
No,
do you know anybody?
Watching them doesn't help at all. Like you watch the shorts and you see you watch all the shorts as well, right?
I do, yes.
Like Incident is like a genuine masterpiece, and that doesn't tell you at all if it's going to win and like I like the movie that won Doc Short just fine, but yeah, I don't know what to do about the shorts. It's a big question.
For years, I thought the worst one is the one you should pick, and now that has even gone awry. That strategy no longer works either. So I'm completely bewildered on that. And I no disrespect to the shorts filmmakers. It's more just in my record, I'd like to just pick 20 categories
it's
going forward.
Introduces an element of gambling into any Oscar pool. It's like just throw it all to the winds. It's going to be what does you in at the end. Alison Brower, thank you for your editing support for me throughout this Oscar season. I don't know if you are as sad as I am when Oscar season is over, but it's time for us to all move on. And what did you learn from this award season?
It is a little deflating to have it end, and I learned so much more about it working closely with you on it. So I'm looking forward to Emmy season and the next Oscar season and the next jobs for these actors that you talked about.
Yeah.
My number one takeaway from the Oscars, I've always enjoyed the Oscars, but it really showed Conan, himself was great, individually was great, but he also really demonstrated why a live TV host, a late night host, even one who, hasn't done that format for a while, is the ideal Oscar host, because that person really knows how to work the room. And they also know how to work the global audience out there. It turned out to be about 20 million, right? And also, they're not afraid of stars.
Yes. I have always said that the key to being an Oscar host, and this happens more in the Golden Globes, where who knows who they're going to get, is you've got to be famous enough to be able to get away with making jokes about these people. Because if you're someone who they don't know, then they're going to look at you like, excuse me, are you talking to me like this? Like, that's why Nikki Glaser did a great job at the Golden Globes, because she's become really famous in the last year. And I think Conan and anyone who's had a major late night show has just met enough of those people to get away with it.
Yeah, and he in particular has such a balance of poking fun at you and poking fun at himself. I mean, he really is a sort of unique voice, even, within the late night host pantheon.
Yeah.
He's gotten good reviews all around. I feel like I'm definitely hearing that they would want to have him back and that the audience would welcome him back. So yeah, again, he was great. I'm not taking away from him, but I just think people who know how to sort of host and can think of both the audience out there in the world and the audience in the room and balance all that and, strike a moment of emotion about the industry, the in memoriam moment, but also be able
the wildfires too, like real, like genuine tragedies. I think that was the part I wasn't totally sure he could pull off, and he did wonderfully.
He was actually pretty great, I thought. And it's aging well even a week later that, he definitely nailed it.
Yeah. Do you have any other dream hosts? I was saying to you before we started that I've always said Keke Palmer, who's not technically a late night host, but she's hosts a lot of game shows, which I think is a huge skill. And, maybe she has to work her way up there. But do you have other dream hosts for this job?
Well, it's interesting because if you're looking at the late night universe, that's changing a lot and frankly shrinking a lot. And I'm like, and it's also always been an ABC thing, so you don't expect to see a Jimmy Fallon or a Seth Meyers, but could one of them be up there one day? Could Taylor Tomlinson, who's like a newer late night host, be, the Oscars in 5 years? I think that's a really interesting possibility because that group is changing and sort of dwindling. Yeah. I think Keke Palmer would be very fun. She was great on SNL. Can she bring a baby bump to the Oscars?
Look, I feel like she's really capable of just about anything. I've always said her, and then really in a totally different direction from what you're saying is that Lady Gaga would be a great Oscar host if she ever wanted to do it. I don't know if she would. She's very famous and doesn't have to do these things, but she should.
Like I said, I enjoyed even the hostings that people look back on less fondly. Anna Hathaway and James Franco, is that right?
That was a rough one. I not her fault. It was entirely his fault. That one I do not like. Seth MacFarlane, I don't look on that fondly. But we've been, the Amy Schumer, Wanda Sykes, Regina Hall year. That was also the year of the slap. That was not their fault. But I do feel like we're on an upswing right now in general. In the I thought Jimmy Kimmel did a great job for his years. Like, it's probably a good thing that he's moved on, let someone else do it. But he's left us in a good spot.
Yeah.
Chris Feil, welcome back. What a ride of this award season it's been together. I'm so glad you're here to wrap it up. So, Chris, what did you learn from this year's award season?
Well, speaking of long rides, I think what I learned from this season is I think the Cannes bubble is about to burst. Cannes has been the festival.
They're riding so high, and you're here to kick those French people to the curb.
Well, this is the thing about festivals and how it always relates to the awards season is that this is all kind of cyclical. The festival that seems to be the one that is where awards buzz really kicks off. And ever since Parasite, it has been Cannes. Even to the point where, Titan wins the Palm and suddenly that kind of helps it in the Oscar race, an Oscar race it otherwise never would have had a place in whatsoever. And then ultimately doesn't go very far because, Titan is really the kind of outlier here in what Cannes has done for the Oscar race.
Yeah.
And you can maybe even push it back a little bit further. Cold War was the year before that, and that got that director nomination. But I think we've gotten to the point where we look to Cannes for the first real indicator of what awards season is going to look like. And I think once the way that the awards race goes, at least for people like you and I, is that as soon as the narrative sets itself, it's going to redirect inevitably. That's how history always plays out.
Okay. So it's not because you think it's like overexposed or anything will fundamentally change. It's just that look, we've figured it out, so now it's going to change.
Well, I mean, you can kind of also, I guess the caveat here is, well, what films is Cannes going to actually play? What films are going to choose to go there, and what films is Cannes going to choose to program? But I think in the comments from Thierry Frémaux, who is the head of Cannes, basically, they're not afraid to say that they're willing to chase Oscar a little bit. And I think if you do that, that's probably going to put you on the wrong path, especially since,
That's true.
a year ago, would anybody be saying Honora was a Best Picture winner? I don't really think so.
Yeah.
But all that being said is like there's always cycles to this as part of it. But I also wonder if, especially coming off of Sundance that had real issues with movies being bought, and then off of Emilia Perez, the big, buying sensation of Cannes, I think that was at least the largest buy of the festival last year.
I think so.
And given the reception around Emilia Perez and what happened when it, reached regular viewers here in the States, I wonder if there will be a little bit more conscientiousness around picking up films.
Yeah, because I feel like you can find a film at Cannes, you can pick it up, you can make it a Best Picture winner, as we've learned. But like the Netflix model of like throwing too much at it, like if you want it too bad, they're somehow instinctively going to turn against you. Like there's so much psychology to the Netflix stumble with Emilia Perez that I think was built in even before the tweet scandal. And I think that really goes to your point that like Cannes can still be a launching point, and like Cannes could still have a Best Picture winner next year. But there's like this bubble of frenzy around it, this assumption that anyone can go there and find themselves an Oscar horse, and that's not true.
Absolutely, and I think all the eyeballs on Cannes and the Cannes lineup is a great thing regardless of Oscar. It brings a lot more attention to global cinema, whether or not they have a place in the Oscar race, and that's a great thing. But, this thing of the Palme winner being a Best Picture nominee or a Best Picture winner is fairly recent. There's not a whole lot of Oscar history there. And some of that is, these juries sometimes have awarded Apichatpong Weir Sathakal films. And eventually a jury's going to pick something that's more esoteric, that maybe has less obvious global appeal, like A Triangle of Sadness, like an Anatomy of a Fall, that just may not be the indicator that just because something's won a Palme means that it's going to have appeal with the Academy.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to ask you in September when I see you in Toronto, like, are you putting the Palme winner on your Best Picture predictions right now? And we'll see if you stick with it, because it really depends. We don't even know the jury president for Cannes yet, right?
Like, we do. It's Juliette Binoche, which, given her taste in past festivals, I don't know if I would necessarily. We got to see what these films are, and we will find out what the films will be in about a month and a half.
Look,
I
that
believe.
Lady knows what an English patient looks like. She might be able to find the next one. That does it for today's episode. This podcast is edited by Brett Fuchs and produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-hosts, all of them, all of those wonderful people. I was so happy to get to wrap up Oscar season by just calling up my favorite people who write about movies and talking to them for 5 or 10 minutes. It was great. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Subscribe to the Prestige Junkie newsletter at theanchor.com and subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I will be back next week looking ahead and making some predictions about the 2026 Oscars. We'll see you then.